I went into this one not knowing exactly what I would get. I mean, I watched some videos, so I had an idea of what to expect. And it was not what I expected as I read through it. But then again, at the same time, it kind of was what I expected as I went through it. Then I struggled a bit at certain points when I was reading it, getting through it and whatnot. And then on the flip side of that, it was absolutely fabulous. I know that sounds confusing, but it really isn't that bad. Today we're talking about The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. I really want to say Liu because it's spelled exactly like Jijin Liu's name, but I think it's pronounced Liu because I think I've heard him pronounce it that way. And if that's how Ken pronounces his name, that's probably how I should pronounce it too. First things first, spoiler warning. This will have very mild spoilers in it. I'm going to say a few things that I guess could be construed as spoilers, but I really don't think they're that bad. So I'll just say mild spoiler warning, but if you haven't read it, I would say you should be perfectly fine watching this review. As also, I'm going to reveal less in this review than the fucking synopsis revealed that I read about it, which gives you some massive spoilers. I have no idea why that's acceptable, but like some real turning, like some twists that I would have found fascinating had I just not read the synopsis. Anyway, first things first, this book opens with a bang. There is an assassination attempt on an emperor, and there are airships flying around, and there are these kite flyers that are like men attached to kites that fly through the air and like attack things. There'll be like battle. Wow, it's wild. It's fascinating the way this opens up. The imagery on display in just the opening chapter is absolutely amazing. I mean, I did a video like the top 10 series that I want to read, and this was one of the series in that video. And I said in that video that I saw some artwork from this book, and it just completely piqued my interest. And I am so glad to say that the imagery that you get from reading the text compared to the imagery in the pictures that you see, oh my God, the text absolutely does not disappoint. Then there's the writing of it and the style and whatnot. Now, booktubers will tell you that this reads like a history book, or at the very least, this is the history book of the world that you're in the Dandelion dynasty, and then the rest of the story follows in the next 3 books, like the story proper starts in the next 3 books. I have no idea. I can't speak to that. I haven't read any of the other books. I've only read this one. But what I can't say is I kind of disagree with that. I didn't feel like this read like a history book. I guess I'm saying I disagree with them, or at the very least, I feel like they're overselling it a bit as far as reading like a history book. Now, granted, yes, this kind of is the history of the world, and yes, it does cover a lot of ground, like a very shockingly large amount of ground, time, and events for the relatively short 600, 700 page count of the book, at least for the ground that it covers. So I guess what I'm saying is I can see where they're coming from and why they say what they say, but I just feel like telling somebody that reads like a history book is really selling this book short in what it is. Because I think this book is extremely well written from page 1 to the end. And it is so engaging from page 1 to the very end. At least as far as like your level of interest is concerned with what's happening in the story at any given moment in time. Now, having said that, this is where actually some of my struggles start to come in, because I just said it was engaging the entire way through, and it was. But after that absolute banger of an opening, it does drop down your level of interest, or at least my level of interest in the book dropped down, and it kind of leveled off for a good while, a little bit longer than I would have preferred. That doesn't mean that it was bad. It was settled into just good book territory, but it kind of stayed there for a shockingly long amount of time. And I started to think there as I was reading, I was like, this is a good book. Don't get me wrong. But it's just going to settle into good book territory. There's not anything great or next level. If something doesn't happen, if something doesn't pick up, it needs some type of an X factor to kick in order to knock this book over into great territory. And I am very happy to say that we absolutely get that by the end of the book on multiple levels, not just one. And for me, there were a couple of different things in this book that took my investment from here to here. One of them, I will not talk about it because it is just essentially spoiler territory, but it's about that mid-book flip. If you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. And it's the thing that was spoiled in the synopsis for me, which just takes all of your tension and kind of raises it up and makes everything in the book so much more interesting and investing and a little bit more tense and a little bit more nerve-wracking. And the other one I will talk about just because it's kind of silly and I don't know why it raised my investment in the book so much, but it really did. And I know this will be a little bit different for everybody. Everybody kind of gets hooked by something slightly different. But for me, it was the very first scene when the gods interact with the humans, or at least the first one that I caught. And that's the trick, because they are mentioned the whole book. They're always talked about. They bring them up. They name them off. They have a glossary in the book where you can see the exact names of the gods, who they are, what they're the god of, how they're related to the world, how they're related to each other. It's fascinating. And they bring them up constantly. But, think of a Game of Thrones. They bring up the gods constantly, but they don't actually end up being characters in the book. And so when they jump in the very first time, it's like there's a character that you're watching and it moves like across the room, we'll say. And as the scene plays out, it shapeshifts into another person and then just starts talking to the other gods and they start talking about the humans like they're pawns. It was fascinating and it just completely hooked me. And I'm the kind of person who likes my gods and my magic to be a little bit more on the soft side. I'm not super into let's bring them in as characters and let's make them this big. I like a little bit of a softer approach to it. So this, for me, should have been a little too much. I don't care. It was so interesting and engaging. I was in from the get-go. And then throughout the rest of the book, it kind of messes with your mind because, like I said, that's the first time that they show up that I caught, because it could have happened multiple times before and I just wasn't paying attention. And then later on through the book, they're going to continuously have conversations between each other just kind of mixed into the rest of the text. It is so interesting and so engaging. It was just that extra level. It didn't need it. The book would have been fine without it. It was just that extra something thrown on top just to make it that much more interesting. But then, like I said, there's that plot twist that flips the book on its head and just makes it that much more engaging to read for about the second half of the book. So, I probably could have done without the shape-shifting gods and been just fine. And I say that because the plot is genuinely that good. You have unlikely allies becoming friends. You have friends becoming enemies. You have adultery on massive levels. And it's funny, I only bring that one up because these people are playing this game, this game of empires, if you will, at such a level that nobody has any misunderstandings of exactly what they're doing, exactly what the consequences of every action and misstep are, and exactly what these stakes are. It's fascinating. There's a hierarchy in, say, a normal person's life where adultery would be the worst of the worst imaginable thing that could happen to a normal person in their daily life. Whereas these people are playing on a certain level where, say, somebody is adulterous towards them, it is so low on the list of events happening in their life at that point in time, they couldn't fucking care less. It's just fascinating the way these people are positioned. These people are they know who they are, they know where they are, they know what their life is and what their situation and their consequences are, and they move, think, and act appropriately and accordingly. And then in a book where the characters are kept pretty much at arm's length. This isn't a super character focused book. You're not going to get all up close and cozy and comfy with these characters. They're a little bit kept at a distance as the book goes on. You still end up super engaged and super invested in the characters, in their lives, in the events of their lives, and what's happening to them, when, where, and how. And he does it with a shockingly small amount of time with each character. You can have a single chapter to get introduced to somebody, and you're already kind of invested in who they are and where they're going by the end of the chapter. It's absolutely fascinating. And I've heard people theorize that he does so well at this because he cut his teeth as an author on writing short stories. I have not read any of those short stories. I do not know. I cannot speak to that. All I can say is what he does is quite impressive. I mean, to the point where by the end of the book, there's a funeral scene for a specific character who doesn't make it to the end of the book. And for a book that keeps its characters kind of at arm's length, that shit hits so hard. At least it did for me. It was extremely effective, and just how I don't know who goes down and how it plays out. That scene hit, and it hit me. I don't know. I was super touched when that happened, and just the way that it played out. And then, on top of everything else, there is the world building itself. And when it comes to the world building in this book, I don't even know what to say about it. It was so good. And I think it kind of comes down to the fact that he's got this real good grasp on Western culture, and also at the same time has a real good grasp on Eastern culture, and really just kind of smashes the two together and blends them in a way that not many people could do, considering his upbringing and his just close ties to both sides. He was raised with this. He didn't do a little bit of research in order to figure this out and how they're going to go together. This is just his life experience growing up with both cultures at the same time. And then he's able to meld them in a way that's just utterly fascinating. And you get the ships and the way that the ships work. And there's this pool of water that the gas comes out of, and it's the only place on the entire planet that produces the gas that can fly the ships. And then there's just all of the hierarchy of the airships coming across and the water ships going across, but then they create monopolies. So somebody's actually attempting to find a way to burrow under the ground to connect the islands so they don't have to rely on these other means of transportation, but then they're going to have bamboo pipes pump air under the... It's so neat. You get so invested in the world building, and he's put so much careful thought and detail into it. It was absolutely wonderful. Now, having done all of this hyping up of the book and talking like a crazy person about how much I loved it, I want to go ahead and I want to re-stress that I did struggle a little bit at the beginning of this book, maybe even the first couple hundred pages. I struggled for a little while to feel like it was really that good of a book. And I want to reiterate that, and I want to stress that, because I'm going to let this sit at about an 8. For a rating. I kind of want to give it a 9 because it's been living rent-free in my head for like a week and a half ever since I finished the book, just kind of going back over it, and I kind of warm to it even more as I think about it in hindsight. But I'm still going to go with my original gut instinct, which is an 8. I don't know. Maybe as time goes on and I come back and I think about it more, I might bump it to a 9. But for right now, we're going with an 8. Anyway, everybody, as always, the link for my Patreon's in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.